There are words that stick with you, words that burrow into your chest and stay there for years, words that follow you into every room you walk into, every dream you dare to chase. You will never be successful. 4 words, spoken by a husband to his wife. Not a stranger, not a bully from school, the man who stood beside her at the altar and promised to love her. But what happened when that same woman stepped onto the Family Feud stage in front of a live studio audience, with Steve Harvey watching, is something nobody in that building will ever forget, because what she did next didn't just prove her husband wrong, it proved something to every single person watching at home. Stay with me, because this story isn't just about a game show, it's about what happens when a woman who has been quietly told she is nothing finally decides to show the world exactly who she is. Her name was Diane Holloway. She was 52 years old. Born and raised in Greensboro, North Carolina, the second of 4 children in a house where money was tight but faith was never short. Her mother worked the overnight shift at a packaging facility. Her father drove trucks across state lines 6 days a week. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and they had the belief that hard work always finds its reward. Diane grew up watching her mother cook meals that stretched further than they had any right to. She watched her father come home exhausted and still find the energy to sit at the dinner table and ask each child about their day. She absorbed all of it, every sacrifice, every lesson, every quiet act of dignity, and she carried those lessons with her into adulthood, into marriage, and into every corner of the life she tried to build. She had a gift that showed itself early. From the time she was a teenager, Diane could cook, not just follow a recipe cook. She could taste something once and recreate it from memory. She understood flavor the way musicians understand rhythm. It was instinctive, natural, and completely her own. By her 20s, friends and family were constantly pushing her to open a restaurant, start a catering business, do something with this talent that was so clearly special. Then she met Robert. He was charming at first. Steady job, confident presence, the kind of man who seemed like stability in human form. They married when Diane was 27. For a few years, things were fine, but as the years passed, something shifted. Robert was not a man who celebrated other people's potential. He was a man who felt comfortable when the people around him stayed small. Every time Diane mentioned the catering idea, he had a reason it wouldn't work. Every time she saved up a little money to invest in her dream, there was a bill, an emergency, a redirect, and slowly, consistently, he began to replace her confidence with doubt. He didn't shout. He was worse than that. He was quiet and certain. "Diane," he'd say, not even looking up from the television, "you're a good home cook, but you'll never be successful in business. That's just not who you are." She heard that sentence so many times that it stopped feeling like an opinion and started feeling like a fact. For almost 20 years, Diane Holloway swallowed her dream and kept cooking for a man who never once said thank you. But then her daughter, Keshia, applied for Family Feud on behalf of their family. Keshia was 26, sharp, and absolutely determined. She had watched her mother shrink for years, and she was not willing to let it continue. She filled out the application, described their family, and 6 weeks later the call came. They were going to be on Family Feud, and when Diane heard the news, something inside her, something that had been quiet for a very long time, started to wake up. Robert's reaction to the Family Feud news told you everything you needed to know about him. He didn't congratulate Diane. He didn't say, "That's exciting, let's prepare together." He looked at his wife of 25 years and said, "Don't embarrass us on television. You freeze up under pressure, you always have." Keshia overheard him say it. She watched her mother go quiet, watched the familiar look pass over Diane's face. That slight drop of the shoulders, the way her eyes moved down to the floor, it was the same look Keshia had been watching her whole life, and something in her snapped. That night, after Robert went to bed, Keshia sat with her mother at the kitchen table. "Mama," she said, "I need you to promise me something. I need you to promise me that you're going to go on that show and play like nobody's watching Robert. Play like it's just you and Steve Harvey and a million people who are rooting for you. Can you do that?" Diane didn't answer right away. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug and stared at the table for a long moment. Then she looked up at her daughter and said, I don't know if I can. That's okay, Keshia said. You don't have to know. You just have to show up. In the weeks leading up to the taping, Diane prepared. Not just casually, she prepared like someone who understood that this was about more than a game show. She and Keshia watched episode after episode together. They called out answers before the contestants could. They drilled each other on survey categories, things people do at weddings, things you find in a refrigerator, things that make a house feel like a home. Diane was good. Really good. Her instincts for what most people would say were sharp, honed by decades of watching people, listening to people, feeding people. But preparation only goes so far. Because the real struggle wasn't the game. The real struggle was what lived inside Diane's head. Every time she practiced an answer confidently, she could hear Robert's voice in the background. Steady, dismissive, you'll never be successful. Diane, you freeze under pressure. The morning of the taping, Robert said nothing as Diane got dressed. He sat at the breakfast table scrolling his phone, completely unbothered. He didn't wish her luck. He didn't look up. As the family drove to the studio, the car was quiet. Keshia reached over from the back seat and squeezed her mother's shoulder. Diane stared out the window and thought about her own mother, who had worked the overnight shift and never once complained. She thought about her father, who came home exhausted and still sat down for dinner. She thought about everyone who had believed in her before Robert spent 25 years trying to take that belief away. By the time they walked into the studio, Diane Holloway had made a decision. She wasn't playing for prize money. She wasn't playing to entertain an audience. She was playing to find out, once and for all, who she really was. The Holloway family was facing the Mercer family from Atlanta, a loud, energetic group who immediately started working the crowd from the moment they walked onstage. They were funny, loose, clearly comfortable in front of cameras. The Holloways were quieter. Keshia was all smiles, but Diane stood near the back, arms folded gently watching. Steve Harvey made his entrance and the studio lit up. He worked the crowd, cracked jokes, bantered with both families. When he got to Diane, he stopped for just a second. Something in her face caught his attention, not nervousness exactly. Something older than that, something that looked like a woman carrying weight that had nothing to do with a game show. Miss Diane, Steve said with his trademark warmth. Tell me something. What do you do? I cook, she said simply. Steve raised an eyebrow. You cook, like home cook, or like, you should have a restaurant cook. Keshia answered for her, fast and certain. She should have a restaurant. She's been told she can't do it, but she absolutely should. The audience reacted. Steve looked between Keshia and Diane. A small smile crossed his face. He didn't push further, but you could see it. He had heard enough. He filed it away, and the game began. The Holloways won the main game. It wasn't close. Diane was a machine. Her answers were instinctive and precise. She moved through the survey board with the calm confidence of someone who finally remembered who she was. The studio could feel it. Even the Mercer family started applauding her answers. When the main game ended and the Holloways had won, Keshia was crying. Their cousin Marcus was jumping, and Diane stood in the center of it, steady as stone, with something new in her eyes. Fast money. The moment everything either comes together or falls apart, Keshia went first. She was sharp and scored well, 147 points. That meant Diane needed just 53 points from 5 questions to win the $20,000. It should have been straightforward. But as Diane stepped to the fast money podium, the studio went very quiet. Steve walked up beside her. He didn't go straight into the game. Instead, he looked at her, really looked at her, and said, quietly enough that only she and the front rows could hear, "You ready to do something that matters?" Diane looked at him. Her jaw was set. Her hands were still. "Yes," she said. Steve nodded once. Then he turned to the audience, turned on the energy, and the game began. Name something a wife does that makes a husband feel appreciated. Without a blink, cook a good meal. The board lit up. Number 1 answer, 38 points. Name something people splurge on when they get a little extra money. A half-second pause. A nice dinner out. Number 2 answer, 19 points solid. The points were adding up. Name something you'd find in a grandmother's kitchen. Diane smiled, her first real smile of the whole game. Cast iron skillet, the audience roared. Number 1 answer, 42 points. They had already won. But nobody moved. Nobody relaxed, because something else was happening now and everyone in that studio could feel it. Name a word that describes a strong woman. Diane didn't hesitate for a single second. Unstoppable. The board flipped. Number 1 answer, 31 points. The audience was on its feet before Steve even announced the 5th question. They were already feeling something. They didn't know the full story yet. They just knew they were watching a woman who had decided to arrive. Last question, Diane. Name something a person does every day that brings other people joy. She closed her eyes, just for a moment, and then she opened them and said, quietly, like a prayer, "Feed the people I love." The studio held its breath. Steve turned to the board. Survey said, number 1 answer, 44 points. The board exploded. The audience exploded. Keshia collapsed into their cousin's arms, both of them sobbing. The Holloway family had won the 20 Zalozen. But more than that, Diane had answered every single fast money question correctly, hitting the top answer 4 times out of 5. Steve Harvey was not performing when he walked back to Diane. His face was open in a way it rarely is on television. He put a hand on her shoulder and said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. What is really going on with you today? Because what I just watched, that wasn't just game show answers. That was somebody setting something straight." The audience settled. The cameras stayed on Diane. She was quiet for a moment, and then she spoke. "For most of my adult life," Diane said, her voice steady and slow, "I was told by someone very close to me that I would never be successful, that I wasn't the kind of person who builds things or starts things or achieves things. I believed that for a long time, longer than I should have." You could hear a pin drop. "My daughter applied for this show because she needed me to remember who I was before someone else decided who I should be. And I think today," her voice cracked just slightly, "I think today I remembered." Steve Harvey stood completely still for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised the whole room. He turned away from the cameras, composed himself, and turned back. When he spoke, his voice was different, not the host voice, not the entertainer voice. Just a man talking to another person. "Let me tell you something, Diane. I've talked to thousands of people on this stage. Thousands. And one thing I know for certain is this: the people who have been told they're nothing are the very ones who end up showing the world everything. You didn't just win a game today, you won back something that was taken from you. And nobody can take it again." The audience gave her a standing ovation that lasted for nearly 2 full minutes. The episode aired 6 weeks after taping. Within 12 hours of going live, the clip of Steve Harvey's speech to Diane had over 2 million views. By the end of the week, it was at 11 million. Comments poured in from everywhere. From women who recognized the feeling of being quietly diminished by someone they loved. From daughters who had watched their mothers disappear into someone else's expectations. From men who said the clip made them look hard at how they spoke to the people in their lives. But what happened next was the part nobody could have predicted. 3 weeks after the episode aired, Diane Holloway opened a catering business. She called it Diane's Table. The name was simple and deliberate, a declaration that she had a table and it was hers, and people were welcome at it. She started small, working out of a licensed commercial kitchen, taking weekend bookings for family events and small corporate lunches. But the response was immediate and overwhelming. People who had seen the Family Feud episode sought her out specifically. They wanted to eat the food made by the woman on the show. They wanted to be at her table. Keshia left her retail job to help manage bookings. Within 4 months, they were turning down work because they couldn't keep up with the demand. Within 8 months, Diane's Table had a waitlist for private dinner events stretching 3 months out. Local food writers started calling. A regional magazine ran a profile. The headline read, "She was told she'd never be successful. Then she fed a city." Steve Harvey heard about the business through his team and reached out. He posted about Diane's Table on his social media. A brief, personal post that said simply, "I met a woman on my show who had been told she would never be successful. She just opened her catering company. Go find her. She will feed your soul." The post was reshared over 100,000 times in 48 hours. When a journalist asked Steve about Diane months later, He was unusually direct about why the moment had affected him so deeply. He talked about his own early life, about being told no, about rooms that were not built for him, about the specific damage that comes when the person doing the dismissing is supposed to be on your side. "I recognized something in her that morning," he said. "I recognized someone who had been lied to for so long that the lie started to feel like the truth. And I watched her, in real time, choose to believe something different. That's not small. That's everything." 1 year later, 1 year after the Family Feud taping, Diane opened a permanent location, a small, warm 40-seat restaurant in Greensboro, North Carolina, not far from the neighborhood where she grew up. She named it after her mother Ruth's. The walls were covered with photos of her family, her parents, her daughter, and one framed photograph from the Family Feud stage. Diane standing at the Fast Money podium, eyes closed, the moment just before she gave her last answer. The restaurant was full from its first week, not just with food lovers, but with people who had seen the episode and made the trip specifically to sit at one of Diane's tables and eat something made by a woman who had come back to herself. People brought their daughters. People brought their mothers. People came alone and quietly told the staff that the episode had given them the courage to leave a bad situation or start something they had been putting off, or simply say out loud for the first time that they deserved more. Diane hired a team of 12, most of them women, most of them with stories not entirely unlike her own. She paid above minimum wage, provided flexible scheduling, and held what she called kitchen table talks. Monthly conversations among the staff about goals, about what they were working toward, about what they needed to get there. It was the kind of workplace culture that grows when a leader understands, from personal experience, what it costs to be unsupported. As for Robert, Diane did not discuss him in interviews. She was gracious and consistent on that point. When pressed, she would simply say, "Some chapters end so the rest of the book can be written. That chapter is closed." Her divorce was finalized 7 months after the episode aired. She kept the kitchen equipment. She kept her name. She kept everything that was hers. What Steve Harvey said that nobody will forget in the months after the episode, Steve Harvey was asked about Diane in several interviews. Each time he returned to the same theme, not the game show, not the winning answers, but the specific danger of being underestimated by someone inside your own home. "The world has enough people ready to tell you no," he said in one interview. "You don't need that inside your own 4 walls. The people closest to you are either building your belief or destroying it. There's no neutral. And the tragedy is that when it's someone you love doing the destroying, you don't always recognize it as destruction. You think it's just honesty. You think they're just being realistic. But realistic and supportive are not the same thing. Not even close." He also talked about what he saw in Diane's answers that day, particularly the final one. "Feed the people I love. That answer told me everything about who she was," he said. Her instinct, even under pressure, even with everything she was carrying, was still to give, still to nourish, still to show up for other people. That's not someone who is nothing. That's someone who has been carrying the weight of being treated like nothing while continuing to be everything. The lesson that stayed Diane Holloway's story is not unique. That's the part that matters most. Across this country, in homes that look completely normal from the outside, there are people, mostly women, but not only women, who have been slowly talked out of believing in themselves by the very people who were supposed to be their safe harbor, the voice in their head that says, "You can't," or "You're not good enough," or "You'll never be successful." It didn't start as their own voice, it was put there. What Diane showed on national television in front of a live audience is that the voice can be replaced. Not quickly, not without cost, but it can be replaced. And it starts with one decision: to show up anyway, to answer the question anyway, to step onto the stage anyway, even when someone you once trusted is sitting at home waiting for you to fail. Kashia said it best in an interview 2 years after the episode. "My mother didn't win because she was lucky. She won because she had been preparing her whole life without knowing it. Every meal she cooked, every person she fed, every time she showed up for her family, even when her family wasn't fully showing up for her. That was all practice. When Steve Harvey asked her those 5 questions, she wasn't answering a survey, she was answering with her whole life. Ruth's restaurant is still standing in Greensboro, North Carolina. The waiting list for weekend dinner service now stretches 4 months. The cast iron skillet that Diane's mother gave her, the one that has cooked thousands of meals across decades, hangs on the wall behind the host stand. Not in a case, not behind glass, just on the wall, blackened and heavy and real, where everyone can see it. Above it is a small hand-lettered sign. It reads, "You don't have to prove yourself to the people who were never paying attention. You just have to show up for the ones who were." Diane Holloway did not write that sign to be inspirational. She wrote it because it was true. She had learned the hard way that waiting for the wrong person to believe in you is the most expensive thing you can do with your time. She had stopped waiting, and the whole world got to watch the moment she did.